Normally you wouldn't think about a fence as anything that would need a permit, right? It's like, hey, this is my house, this is where I live. If I need to fence my backyard, if I want to fence my front yard, I'm just going to do it, right? I think most people probably think that way. And I would probably lend myself to say that for the most part, that's probably true. But depending on where you live, fence permit may be required, and depending on what size it is, a fence permit may be required. I just want to make sure you have the information so you kind of know before you put a fence in that, you know, there could be some requirements on size and location that maybe you just didn't know existed. In a general sense, per the code book, and I'm going to hop over here right now. Per the code book, work exempt from a permit, right? Fences not over 7 feet high. So per the code book, fences that aren't over 7 feet high don't need a permit. You're free to go do what you want, right? If you live out in a rural area, if you live, you know, on acreage, and you live in a county, like you're not in a metropolitan area, that's probably safe to say that's probably true. You know, as long as you're not like completely blocking off view and putting up a 10-foot fence right along the road. You know, in general, you're probably fine. Most people put up a 6-foot fence. Code book says anything under 6, permits not required. So probably pretty good to go. But if you live in a big metropolitan area, and depending on what your building department or where the county or city that you live in, typically fences have their own specific code requirements per location on where you live. And for example, I live out in a county. There's not much. Truthfully, I don't even have an idea if a fence permit's required, and I wouldn't even probably ask because I live out on acreage, and you know, I live in a county per se. I don't live in a city. And if I felt like putting a fence up, I just put a fence up, right? Well, you hop into the city where I work, and a fence permit is required for any fencing. You're like, really? Yeah. Because what happens is you get into side streets, and the city wants to make sure that cars that are going through side streets are able to see around the corner. Well, if they're going to go and require permits for corner lots, then they're going to also require permits for any other lots. And they're also going to be able to decide where the setbacks are off of sidewalk. You know, are you allowed to put your fence right up against the sidewalk? How tall can it be? Where I work, usually they don't let any fencing from the front of the house all the way to the street. Can't be over like 42 inches. Sometimes it's 36 inches. In a normal situation though, from the front of the house back can always be 6 feet. Now, if you're on a side lot, and depending on how cars are turning in and out, there might be what they call a clear view triangle, meaning like if I'm in a car and I pull up and I need to look right or I need to look left, I need to be able to see around that corner to see if cars are coming, which they would call like a clear view triangle. Sometimes that clear view triangle can just be no fencing, and then you have a 6-foot fence outside of that clear view triangle. And sometimes they'll say, well, you know, you can be 36 inches tall in that particular location, or maximum 42 inches tall. I don't quite know the particulars on where I work on how they decide that, but I do want to make sure that you kind of have an idea. If you're out there, you're getting ready to put some fence in, and or you're paying somebody, a fencer, and you're saying like, you know, do I need a permit? Can the fence be this tall? And they're just like, oh yeah, you don't need anything, or you're doing it yourself and you just want to be sure. Check with your local building department. You know, you might be able to get on their city website and just kind of see what the requirements are for fencing. But just kind of keep that in mind, especially if you're on a corner lot, if you live in a big metropolitan area and you want to put fencing up in your yard. Just make sure you don't put up the wrong sizes and then you have somebody come in and tell you got to cut it down or move it or whatever. I just trying to save you guys, you know, those few extra little tips. Make sure that I keep you moving without costing any extra time and money. So there's just kind of quick rundown on fencing. I know it sounds kind of crazy to even think about fencing and permits and sizes and requirements. You can just put up where you want, but depending on where you live, just keep in mind that you might need a permit and there might be some requirements on fence sizes and locations.